and then you should be able to see a little camera when you hover over
Oh,
those
there it
settings.
is.
Yeah, so just click that because it should
Wait a
have a little
minute. Wait
red
a
line
minute.
over it. When you click it, it'll turn on your camera.
Oh, yeah, I see it. Okay, now I see it.
All
Oh,
right,
oh,
there we
there it
are.
is.
Look at that modern technology. Okay,
All right.
so we're going to go ahead. I'm going to do a few quick settings on my end, and then
Do I have
we
enough
will
light?
get underway. Probably, yeah.
Okay.
Okay, so we'll see how this goes. All right, welcome officially to Mom Tackles the Internet. Okay, so my name is Chris. This is my mom, Linda. So introducing everybody, and really, the whole point of this show, in essence, and this is just where right now it's not being recorded or live broadcasted or anything like that. The whole point is because my mom and I have been talking about how sometimes people find more life at the end of their money. They find, of course, there's more month at the end of the money and all these other sayings that are out there. But in essence, there is this generation that's out there that has a massive amount of value that they can give to society, that they have given to society, except sadly, they did not keep up with computers and internet and everything else. And so things that people like myself take for granted, because I basically am in that industry and I use it every day. And I have a business myself that is with a distributed team. And so we're very internet focused. And in the world of Corona, which is when this is being recorded right at the end of December 2020, there isn't really an option to go out there and get more money for an older person right now. So you can't just go out to and work somewhere in a retail job and pick up some extra bucks, because now it is actually dangerous to do that. And so it became sort of a perfect storm where you and I could chat and say, okay, let's help you out with some internet stuff, internet skills, so that you can go get work on the internet and actually legit work, because it is a thing. But you have to have skills to do it. And that's what sort of led us to this, because there have been conversations like trying to figure out how to turn on your Zoom, that sort of stuff that we've had, where it has been kind of a slow process. And it was like, all right, let's record all of this, because to your point, you can jump in whenever you want. To your point, you've had friends that you've talked to about kind of doing something like this and showing them and talking about the things that you're doing, and they've pretty excited about it, which is why we decided to record the process. So remember, the goal of this is not to create this big giant show. Like, if that happens, great. It's really to help you to build your skills on the internet. Yes?
Yes. Yes. A lot of people, as you said, and I always like the word that you use, value, especially in my generation. We didn't have as much access to understanding the computer. Um, at least a lot of us didn't. We might have been working retail, some sort of a physical job, so we didn't have the need for a computer and didn't have to learn it. The other thing that I've talked to and a lot of my friends is, while they worked with computers at their work, it was a simple program that they used specifically for their work. So they are not really understanding the real ins and outs of the internet,
Right.
and how it can work and how they can make money. And they are very, very excited about being able to learn this as much as I am.
All right. Well, let's start with building some 21st century skills then. And we're gonna start this first show again. This is going to be the worst it'll ever be. Every show will get a little bit better as we go through. We sort of figure out a curriculum and all that fun stuff. But we thought right now, let's just start with your basic questions, because you are really at the beginner stages of this. So what basic questions do you have about the internet, how it works, all that sort of stuff? We'll explain that, give a good foundation. And then ultimately we will move hopefully pretty quickly into you setting up a blog, learning some WordPress skills, which is a platform to develop sites and that sort of thing. Those are marketable skills now to the world. And so being able to give you some of those basic skills so that you can go out there and put up a shingle as the rest of us are doing now, but on the internet as a marketplace, and earn a little bit extra cash. So where do you want to start?
Well, I think just in talking to some of my friends, while we might have some general being able to get on the computer skills, I think for a lot of us, the confusion is, you get on your computer and you might buy a new computer. Well, it automatically takes you to Microsoft Edge, and you may not necessarily want that. So what would be the biggest difference in understanding Microsoft Edge and Google, and what the differences are, and why you would use one over the other?
All right. So we're going to go ahead and bring up my screen here. And what we're going to do is I'm going to share screens. So I'm going to go ahead and I can do this on my end with Zoom since I'm what they call the host of the meeting. So I'm going to bring that up and we're going to do a quick little share screen here. Okay, so let's explain kind of how the whole thing works with the internet. So you should be seeing my screen right now. It looks kind of like graph paper. Okay. Yeah. So the way to think about this, so in terms of like the structure of the internet, right? So you have this whole thing here. This is the browser window, right? That we're looking at right now. So it's called a browser. So the browser is what gives you access to the internet. So I'm just going to put this little thing here. We're going to call it a browser. So the browser is like the piece of software that you use to access the internet. Okay, I'm just going to call this the internet. So to do all the stuff that you want to do when you're looking at banking, if you're doing any sort of banking online, if you're just browsing for recipes online, when you're looking at the stuff on Facebook online, all of that's on the internet. The browser is what connects to that. And then what will happen is there are different companies that have made different browsers. So I'm just going to search for some stuff here. So there's one, which you are familiar with, which is Chrome. Mm-hmm. I'm going to shrink that down. So Chrome is a browser. There's another one that when you get your first computer, especially if you're on a PC, so again, different type of thing that can also access the internet. All these are just browser windows. But there's another type of browser that Microsoft makes, which is called Edge. Used to be called Internet Explorer. It's kind of an older version of it. Okay. So, but this is Microsoft Edge. You'll see this little icon sometimes.
Yes.
And so this is the one that, you might see at the, in your taskbar, right? Sometimes because Microsoft, when you install Microsoft Windows, it comes with Windows. So this is their browser. This is like the default browser for a lot of people. So if one of your friends is like, oh, I don't use Chrome, I use Edge. Like it's just a different browser. It's a different tool to use to access the internet. That's all it is. Okay. Now the reason, just quickly covering it, doesn't affect you because you have a PC, but there is also another one primarily, and there's a few others too. We're going to cover the main ones that you're more than likely going to hear about, and that is Macintosh, right? People that are using iPads and whatever, the Macs. So there's one called Safari. So Safari is what Apple uses. So that's Apple's version. So, and that kind of looks like that. So you'll see this icon. That is the Safari browser. So all of these things do the same stuff. Okay. All of these things do the same stuff. So let me just pull this up here. Try to combine the dots. So here you've got the browser and you've got different companies that make the browser. So who makes Chrome?
Google.
Right. Who makes Edge?
Microsoft.
Who makes Safari? Think about the other big platform, like the other big companies that are out there.
Microsoft. Apple,
right. So there's Apple Safari, there's Microsoft with Edge, there's Google with Chrome. So they all three have their own little way of accessing the internet.
Okay, is there only three?
No, there are a lot. There's Mozilla, there's Brave, there's Firefox, there's all sorts of stuff that's out there. For the most part, I wouldn't worry about those because you're probably not going to run into them. But for now, stick with these, right? Because especially when you're first starting out, it is so easy to get overwhelmed and frustrated because there's a million things to learn and you will never learn them all at one time. You have to eventually start using and get some skills and get some practice. And then you can come back and kind of relearn another thing, right? So I would focus on just kind of learning one thing at a time and one thing that's useful for you. So if you were now to explain what, the difference between Chrome and Edge and Safari are, how would you say it right now?
That they're basically all the same thing. They're browsers.
Right. They're all browsers. That's exactly right. Okay. So why are there different ones? Primarily because companies are competing with each other, right? So you've got Google Chrome, which is what we're using. This is what you're seeing on my screen. This is Chrome. The reason that I use Chrome is because it's signed in with my Google account, right? So it's signed in with a Google account and all my Google services are synced to it. So I use Google Calendar, I use Gmail, use Google Drive, which is like a a cloud storage place to store files and stuff. So there's all of the different services that Google provides. They're all sort of linked together with my Google account. Chrome is also linked with that Google account. So it's a better experience for me as a user to use Chrome. Most people in the world use Chrome. So and I think for similar reasons, because it's just a better experience. Everything is unified together. And for Google, it makes sense because they have you signed in as a browser. They can see what you're doing on the internet. Again, it's anonymized. I know it sounds creepy when they're doing that stuff, but it's really just, if you're looking at a bunch of recipe stuff, they will, when you go to search, your searches get better and they send more recipes of the stuff that you like. Like you like recipes around tea cakes and stuff like that.
Mm-hmm.
So when you're looking for recipes, they're more than likely going to show you that stuff and less likely to show you recipes on how to do kids treats or something, if that's not what you're looking at, right? And it's because you're in the Chrome browser and you're searching in Google, the search engine and everything else, where they can sort of understand you a little bit better. And so they can provide a better service for you. That's the whole point of it.
Okay.
So Edge does the same thing with Microsoft, right? It's Microsoft's version of it. The problem with Microsoft, the challenge with Microsoft, is that it doesn't do as good of a job, in my opinion, right? I'm definitely Team Google for sure. But in my opinion, it doesn't do as good enough of a job of connecting the dots. I don't use Microsoft Calendar. I don't use Microsoft Email, right? Microsoft has a search engine called Bing, but that's really it. There isn't a benefit for me. There's not a really big payoff for me to using Microsoft Edge because it doesn't have that unified feeling that Google Chrome does. And then for me, I am on a PC, so I'm just not going to use Safari because it's not inherent on a PC. Right. And for the same reason, that's all about the Apple people. So if you're on Apple, chances are you're using Safari or Chrome. Right. And if you're on PC, chances are you are using Chrome and probably not Edge unless you just got a brand new PC. So that's where Chrome is. Now, Chrome you have to install. So Chrome you have to actually download, which you have already done this, right? Anybody that needs to do it, just go Chrome download and you can type in Chrome download and you'll see Chrome and then, download the fast security. That's really it. Just search for it on Google or Bing or whatever the search engine is that you're using. Go click to download it. You can install it from there and then you can start using Chrome, right? You can sign in with your Google account. You can see here that with these little icons, this is my photo. So that's how we know we are signed in. And you can use different accounts if you need to as well, but it's getting a little ahead of things. So for now, browsers, they're all the same. They just access the internet. It's a matter of which one do you want to use. Some of it's personal preference, and some of it is the preference in terms of, again, in my opinion, that Google just does a better job at unifying the internet experience with all of the different tools that I use Google for, therefore I also use Chrome because everything's combined together. If I used Apple for all things, maybe I would do Safari, right? Maybe. But right now, Chrome works really well. And again, that's the majority of the world, majority of users use Chrome. So that's why I would also use it because the majority of people do. So internet pages are used, when you're trying to make a really good internet experience for somebody, if you're building a website, they're probably using Chrome. So the websites are always looking good on Chrome. They may or may not look good on Edge or other things like that because of that. And Chrome also is very secure and updates all the time. And it updates in the background. Now, these other ones also now do that, but they didn't used to. Chrome's been doing that kind of from the beginning. They would always update in the background for you. So you always had the most recent secure version of Chrome. So that's how that works.
Okay. What is the biggest difference between a browser and a search engine?
Okay. So search engine is kind of part of the internet, right? So the internet has, I'm just going to use google.com. So we'll just kind of bring this up. So let's see if I can bring up a good icon for search. Something we can use for search engine. We'll just use this. Okay. So there are search engines, right, as part of the internet. So I'm just going to say this is part of the internet. You can do search on the internet, right? So this is how you're accessing the internet. This is the stuff you can do while you're on the internet. In fact, I'm going to reverse these and say this is the stuff you can do. So one of the things you can do is search for things, right? Using the search tools that are available. So one of those is obviously Google. The other one that exists out there is Bing. Move this out of the way. There we go. So I believe this is Bing's latest icon. So there's Bing. That's another search engine. The most popular one by far is Google. So it's one that everybody's familiar with, right? So that's why you say you Google stuff. You don't Bing stuff. So that's Google, but Bing is there. Now, Bing is the default search engine. Just kind of show everybody what they look like. So Google is very simple, google.com. And it pulls up that search engine. You can search for whatever you want. Bing.com if you're going to go to Bing. Now, remember, if you load up your browser and you're using Edge, Bing's probably going to be your default. And whenever you come to a competitor search engine, right, what they call search engines, it will always try to make you like, hey, why don't you go ahead and, make us your default browser? So, because Microsoft obviously wants you to use Bing, because then they learn more about you and they can serve ads up to you that are relevant. And that's how they make their money. That's how these platforms make their money. It's a free service, right? But when you search for something, ads appear. Those ads are how these services make money. And they do that by serving you relevant information, right? So if I type in tea cakes, I might even get a different result than you would, right? But we see this up here, and I can see this is the stuff that Google's basically gone across the internet and searched for and said, hey, these are the things that we think are the best things for what you're looking for.
Okay.
So the way that I think about it is these search engines are kind of like, a friend, essentially. When you ask a friend for a recommendation, you say like, hey, I want to go out to a good Chinese place, right? And what do you recommend? And your friend says, oh, I'll go to the place down the street. Well, if the place down the street turns out to be a shoe store, not a Chinese food place, then you're not going to ask that friend for recommendations anymore, right? Because they're just not good at giving recommendations. And the search engine is kind of like that friend where you're going to ask it for recommendations. So its job is to make sure that it's giving you good recommendations all the time, so you constantly come back. So if you ask it for an example of tea cake recipes and it doesn't give you tea cake recipes that you like, you're going to stop using that search engine. So it's their job, both Google and Bing, and there's other ones out there too, but really these are the primary ones that matter. And Google really is the one that most people are using, right?
Yes, because a lot of my friends, what they do is, even though they're on Microsoft Edge, they use the Google search engine.
Right.
And of course, the question that came to me was, why would I, of course, what is the big difference between the browser, which Google Chrome and Google search engine? And now I get it, because basically in the same house, in the browser house of Google is everything that goes with Google, and the same thing with Microsoft Edge. However, then that means you can use the search engines of other companies, correct?
Correct.
Okay.
Yes, you can definitely use the search engines of other people's companies.
So but it depends. But it seems that most people really like the Google search engine.
Because Google does a better job for most people, right? Because again, Google's just that search engine is just a thing that you use to recommend, products and services, things that you're asking it questions or whatever. So you ask the search engine. If the search engine does not do a good job, then you're going to stop using that search engine. That's kind of what's happened with, Bing. Like Microsoft has it, but Google just does a better job. Them doing it for longer. They've got, when you hear about algorithms, that's kind of just formulas that Google uses to figure out what it is that you want. And part of the reason that your searches are better is because you're signed into the Chrome browser. So it knows that you've been looking at different sites, and it might recommend a site in the search engine that you really like that has tea cake recipes. And it knows that you have tea cake recipes. So it might prioritize that site and say, hey, that site that you like, that brand or website, or whatever it was, just had this blog post. You should take a look at that, right? Because they understand you a little better than what a generic, something like me. If you just ask me about it, I'd be like, I don't know, here's a page, right? But Google does a better job. So that's what the search engine is for. It's the recommendation, right? Where it says, hey, send me a recommendation on this. I'm trying to answer this thing. So tell me what to do. Now, again, to your point, you could, use use Edge, and you can make Google the search engine, right? That Edge does. So you have that option as you're going through here. You could make Bing, technically, if you wanted to. You can have Bing go through and send out the search engine on Google. So it can do that here, right? So if you're on google.com and you've got Bing, you could do that as well. So you've got that ability. You don't want to, as a rule, because, I think it's better to have, me personally, it's a better experience. Again, everybody's got personal preference. There is no wrong way of doing it. I just think for my personal preference would be to have Google.
Yeah, I have always found that Google seems to cover or give me a lot more suggestions versus what Bing does.
Right. Better quality suggestions.
Mm-hmm.
Yep. And so that's typically what happens is, like, Bing comes with Edge as the default browser. So I'm just going to kind of bring that over here. And then Google comes with, Chrome as the default browser, of course. So you have that as we go down here. So now you've got all of that coming through here.
Okay.
And then you've got Safari. Apple does not have a search engine. So Apple's using Google, or is Apple is using correct. So Apple uses Google or Bing or, DuckDuckGo. There's lots of other different search engines out there. But what happens is Google actually pays to be Apple's, I believe right now, Apple's default search engine. So if you're using Safari, chances are it'll be Google, but Apple does not have their own. So they just never.
That's interesting.
So
Okay.
that's how that works. And again, so it's kind of disconnected, but they do work better together, right? Microsoft works better with Bing, Google works, or Edge works better with Bing, and then Chrome works better with Google.
Mm-hmm.
All right. What else?
Okay, so now under the Google House, and I imagine under the Microsoft House, the browser. So in Google, you have Gmail, Google Docs. What else?
So let's bring this out here, and we'll do this in a little different area. So we'll do what's in Google.
The spreadsheets.
Yep. So hang on. So we'll do Google, and then kind of the stuff that Microsoft has, because those are really the two you're going to use the most.
Okay.
I'm going to put in here, especially you. I'll put in here Apple. I don't really know Apple products that well, so I'm not going to be the best at that. But Google for sure, and Microsoft.
Okay.
So you've got, in fact, here's what we're going to do. We'll do a little pop quiz. So we have the companies, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then what we're going to do is we're going to do the products that those companies offer.
Okay.
So browsers are one thing,
Right.
that companies have. The other things they have are the search engines.
Yes.
So this is the recommendation thing that you go through. So they have the browser, they have the search engine. And then they have something else called cloud storage. So this is where you're going to hear about Google Drive, or you're going to hear about Microsoft OneDrive, I think is what they call theirs.
Okay,
Apple
so
has
the drive
iCloud.
means that it's a cloud storage.
Yeah, we'll get to that in a second.
All right.
And then you're going to have, let's call these productivity, right? Productivity stuff. And I'll say apps for lack of a better word here, but apps,
Okay.
programs, software, all sort of the same thing.
Okay.
So for now, we'll keep it like this, and we'll expand that if we need to go a little higher. So what's the browser that Google offers?
Google Chrome.
Right. Okay. So this is previous lessons.
Mm-hmm.
So we know Google does Chrome. What about Microsoft? What's the browser that Microsoft
Edge.
does? Right.
Microsoft Edge.
Yep. And then what about Apple?
Safari.
Exactly right. So now, what about the, pull this down here. What about there's Safari for Apple? Okay, so we've got Google Chrome, right? It's the browser that Google gives. The browser that Microsoft gives us is Edge. The browser that Apple gives us is Safari. What do we use browsers for?
What do we use browsers for? Well, we can search in those particular companies.
What do you use browsers for?
Oh, to get to the internet.
Exactly right. Yep.
Okay.
That's it. Yep.
Okay.
Okay. So then the search engine. So what's the search engine that Google has?
Google.com.
Right. Google.com. So put this as a little icon here. And then what about Microsoft?
Bing.
Yep. So Microsoft has Bing. And then what about Apple?
Apple can use both, but Apple uses Google.
Correct. As a default, yep. It's kind of like either or, right? So we'll
Right.
you can adjust stuff, and you can move these around, right? Primarily it's Google, but there's also Bing. Right? And technically, again, these come default. So Edge comes with Bing, but you could put Google on it.
On your computer.
You could use Google as your default search engine. So default means the one that loads up first. Right, without you having to type it in. So you could switch it if you wanted to. So I'm going to make it a little G down here. So it's kind of emphasize that, yes, you could make it an option if you wanted to. Whereas this one's like a little B. Some people will use Bing. But again, Apple does not have their own. So Apple primarily sells that to somebody, which in this case is Google. That's who you get sold to. That's who buys it. Okay. So cloud storage. So what are the things you've heard that where you store your files on these cloud things?
I've just heard of iCloud.
Okay. So iCloud is one. And who does iCloud?
I believe that's Apple.
It is Apple. That's exactly right. So we're going to do iCloud here. bring this one over. So Apple's got iCloud. And so what they're doing is they're just allowing you to store files on computers that they own. That's all it is. Just like if I allowed you to store a file on my computer, but you were on your computer, that would be cloud, because it's not on your computer. It's on somebody else's computer on the internet. That's all that cloud is. It's just somebody else's computer on the internet is the cloud, not yours. If it's stored on your computer, it's what they call local storage. It's stored locally. Otherwise, if it's on the cloud, it means somebody else's computer somewhere on the internet. That's all it is. So Apple's got a bunch of computers that they store a bunch of people's stuff on, user stuff on, called the iCloud. And that's where users can use their computers for that. It's like almost
sort
like
of
leasing
storage
space.
Unit.
It's like a storage unit. It's exactly right. It's like a storage unit that's on somebody else's computer, and they're allowing you to store up to a certain amount of stuff, right? Everybody's got different limits and stuff, but that's how it works. What's another one you've heard of that's like that?
Google Cloud. Google Drive, rather.
Drive, right? Yep. So Google Drive is theirs, and that's what Google does. So this is what Google Drive looks like. So Google Drive is the exact same thing, except of course it's not Apple's computers, it's Google's computers that they own.
Okay.
They allow you to store stuff on. That's what we use as a company. I use Google Drive for all of our company stuff. All of our team accesses Google Drive. And that way I can give different people access by their Google accounts and say, okay, you can go get the files you need in this location, right? In that storage unit that Google is allowing us to essentially rent. That's what it is. But it's on their computers. And then Microsoft, you know what Microsoft is called?
No.
Microsoft is whenever you see them saying OneDrive, OneDrive.
Oh,
OneDrive.
yeah.
That's what Microsoft says. Same exact thing. Just Microsoft computers. Now, there are other ones as well. Amazon is actually in this business as well, and they have something called AWS. It's a lot more technical and not something that you'll probably run into, at least for a while. And remember, the whole point of this is you building the basic beginner skills to get used to this so you can go help other people with their businesses online. Again, just helping them create blog posts or whatever the things are that you can do, but just to give you the basic skills. And you got to know how these pieces fit together. Right. So when somebody says, oh, we use OneDrive, okay, even if you've never used OneDrive, you have used Drive, or maybe you've used iCloud. So that means you know how to use cloud storage. OneDrive probably works pretty similar to how the other ones work. It's just that it's on Microsoft's computers now. That's it. Mm-hmm. So it might look a little different, but the functioning is going to be pretty close to the same because it does the same thing. It's just cloud storage. Make sense so far?
Yep.
All right. So now we're going to say productivity apps. Now, these are the things like Google Sheets and Google Docs. So I'll put in some stuff here. I'm just going to put this in. So there's Google Sheets, there's Google Docs, there's Google Slides. These are all the productivity apps that Google offers. So these are also based on the cloud. So you don't have to download all this information. You can just go create a spreadsheet online by going into Google Docs, or Google Sheets, I should say, is what they call it.
Okay, now Google Docs, isn't that kind of the same thing as Microsoft Word?
Correct. So we're going to call these productivity apps. So it's spreadsheets, it's word processors where you type letters and stuff, right?
Right.
Slides, like where you can create slides or presentations. Those are the productivity apps. We're going to call those for now.
All right.
And so in those, it's Office 365 is what they call this, but it is Microsoft Office. So Office 365 has all these different tools here. I'm just going to try to find some icons that we can use. This will work. So this is Office. Now they call it 365 because it's on the cloud. You can also download these. So these are actually programs you can download on your computer as well. Google does not offer that. Everything's 100% in the cloud, which means what? When I say it's on the cloud?
It's on their computers.
It's on their computers on the internet. Exactly right. So they host everything. There's nothing that you have to download. You just use it. And then Microsoft, you have the option, right? In this case, Word, PowerPoint. There's something called OneNote, and then Excel, which is for spreadsheets, right? Google, go ahead.
Now, as I recall, Office 365 you have to pay for every year.
Yes. And Google is free. There are, I think, lighter versions now of Microsoft Office that are also free, but don't quote me on that. We have Office. We just don't use it all that much. I think the license is like, at least of this recording, I think it's somewhere around $100 a year.
Yes.
For a few licenses. So it's worth it, especially if you're in the business world. You will probably need it going off and helping other people, because if somebody uses Excel and they say, hey, I need your help with this spreadsheet to put in data entry or something like that, you're going to need to have Excel to do
Okay.
that. Now you can use Google to open up Excel docs, right? It does that. So Google Sheets is compatible and will open stuff up. But typically from a business standpoint, if I'm the business owner and I send you an Excel spreadsheet, I expect you to send an Excel spreadsheet back. And so
Yes.
you would want to keep it in the same format, because sometimes when these things open up, they mess things up a little bit.
Okay.
And so I wouldn't expect you to send me a Google Sheet back, in other words, because it, would not be the thing I'm familiar with, right? And if I'm the person asking you to do the work, you don't want to change that on me. So keep the same stuff up, and it's relatively inexpensive to have those. If, on the other hand, I send you a Google Sheet, right? That's the spreadsheet Google Sheet. Then in that case, Google Sheet is when you would send me back, which is easier, right? You just get a little URL, you do your changes, and then they can also see all those. So that's why people like the Google stuff, and why it tends to be a little more popular than this. A lot of larger businesses will use Microsoft. A lot of small businesses tend to use Google stuff by and large. Apple, I believe, does have their own stuff as well. So I don't even know, though, what it's called, because it's not that popular. But I know they'll have, like, iMessage or anything like that. Yeah, I can't even.
Yeah, nothing's coming up.
I just don't know what they're called. But again, it's because I don't use Apple products. But you probably have seen them on there where they might have, like, Apple, notes, or.
Yeah, they do have notes.
So they might have some things like that, right? But they're not known for business productivity apps at all.
Okay.
So Apple's just really about consumer stuff. They don't really focus on business stuff. So Microsoft Office will be your main business stuff. And then with Google, for sure, the docs and sheets and PowerPoint. Now, the other one that we're going to add on here while I'm thinking about it is kind of along the lines of productivity, but it's really, we're going to call this email. That's an important thing that you will be using.
Mm-hmm.
So what is Google's email system called?
Gmail.
Right. So that's Gmail. This one here. Okay. So that little symbol. So you will be in Gmail. You would have a Gmail account for your business, right?
Yeah.
As when you're working with individuals, you would be, by the way, what they call a freelancer, which means that you're freelance. You can work for anybody you want, right? You're just a contractor. And so they could hire you to do data entry. They could hire you to help them build their WordPress blog posts or whatever else, to edit stuff, right? Whatever the things are. And a lot of that will be happening through Gmail, right? Email. So you have that. Then they also have, Microsoft has, I'm going to put in here, Outlook. They also have Hotmail, OneNote. So that sort of thing. This is the Outlook one. So I think I called it OneNote earlier, but Outlook is it. So you see a little icon there. So they have Outlook, and that's how they do it. So a lot of corporations will use Outlook. Larger companies will. You will mostly use Gmail. Most small freelancers, small businesses tend to use Gmail, or what they call Google Suites, which is where it's like a paid professional version. But for the most part, Gmail is perfectly fine. And then Apple
Google
has theirs
Suites.
too.
Okay. Google Suites, is that like a productivity app then?
Google Suite is so there's free versions of these, and there are paid business versions. As you grow your business, you might want everything, like for me, right? So like our business is measurementmarketing.io. So if my emails are, my name at measurementmarketing.io, right? But it's technically run by Google. But it's not at Gmail. If it was my name at Gmail, then that's the free version. Of that. So there are paid versions. When you're first starting out, I wouldn't worry about those. And you'll hear people say, "Oh, I'm going to set you up with," and maybe they will. Maybe companies will hire you, even as a vendor, because we do this sometimes with our vendors. And I will create an email account for them on our business account, and I will give that to them. But it looks exactly like Gmail, because it is Gmail. It's just a paid branded version of it, so it says my company name as opposed to Gmail. That's all it is, but it works exactly the same. So if you know how to use Gmail, you will also know how to use Google Suite stuff.
Okay.
Especially as a vendor or a contractor, for sure. And then as your business grows, you might eventually decide, if you're adding team members to your business, you might decide, okay, I'm gonna have our company will have its own G Suite, and you'll create that. But that will be a lesson for future, for sure.
Okay.
For now, to get used to using the free stuff, if you can use the free stuff, you can use everything else. It doesn't change. So again, Apple really not known for productivity apps. Apple's got their messaging, their email system. I don't know what it's called. So again, this is because I'm not an Apple guy. But whatever it is on Apple, they have it as well to check that. All right. So then the other things that exist, I'm going to pull this up a little bit. Let's grab the right one. There we go. Okay. So the other things that exist are messenger platforms. And this is where it can get a little tricky. So I'm going to zoom out just a little bit here. So we have these messenger platforms. So a messenger platform is something where team members can talk to each other kind of in real time, where they type in stuff. So what's a messenger platform that you are familiar with, that you have used, even if it's just a little bit, because we showed you how to use it briefly?
Slack.
Slack is a messenger platform. So Google does not own Slack. Microsoft does not own Slack. Apple does not own Slack. Technically, Slack is owned by a company called Salesforce. So it's like there's all of a sudden you'll start to see, this is where it branches out. Besides the big three, right? The internet is not just the big three. You'll see other companies that have, oh, okay, well, they're known for their messaging platform, right? They have Slack. And so you'll use Slack. Some people will do that. Now, Microsoft just recently opened up something, and you might actually start running into this because this is the one that's been around for a very long time. Who's something else that's got a messaging platform is Teams, Microsoft Teams. So you'll also hear about that. Again, the difference is, what do you think difference is between something like Microsoft? So this is Teams, Microsoft, and somebody like Slack. Tell me about the businesses. Think about the business. Which one is a small business more likely to use?
Well, more like probably Slack.
Right. Yeah, that's exactly right. Because Microsoft tends to go after corporate, big, gigantic, massive companies, right? Google's in for the small companies a little bit. Google currently does not have a messenger platform, not one that really competes with Slack or Teams. So currently that's it. Apple also doesn't really have anything like that. Facebook's trying to get into that, right? Where they've got Facebook Messenger and they're trying to get some, but that's more for personal communications, like between grandma and the grandkids. It doesn't really work into business too much. So really the business messengers are this and Slack. There's also, sometimes you will hear Skype is another one. So Teams is a very different format, and it's kind of really, everyone's moving to these types of, Slack formats and Teams formats. It's just easier to coordinate with those tools. And we'll show those later as we get through more of these episodes, because right now it doesn't matter really what they look like. It's just like trying to figure out, okay, how's all stuff fit together, right? So Skype is something else that some companies will use, especially really small companies will use Skype when they're starting out, because it's been around the longest. But most of them are using Slack now. Everybody pretty much moved years and years ago. People stopped using Skype and started using Slack because it just did the job better. So if you're working with an organization that still likes using Skype, you just know they've probably been around for a little while and may not be that familiar or comfortable with a lot of tech sometimes because they're still on Skype. But Slack does a better job overall. So that's kind of the messenger platform. And anything else you have a question on, or different components?
No, I'm just, now the Salesforce stuff that you have here, that's not exactly the same thing as productivity apps.
Salesforce also has a bunch of productivity apps and everything else. You will, that is a much more advanced stuff, which is the only reason I'm not bringing it up here and going into details of it. I don't think you're going to need it or come across it.
Okay.
It's a really, really advanced, very technical platform to work with. So you probably won't see Salesforce stuff.
Okay.
The only reason I mention it is because they just bought Slack like a month and a half ago. So
yes, I did hear that.
Otherwise, Slack was owned by Slack. So that was it. Now Slack is owned by this company called Salesforce. So you will hear Salesforce. It's just very technical and you do not have anywhere near the skills. So I wouldn't even, if somebody's like, oh, I've got a job for Salesforce, you're like, not your job, because you just don't have it yet. Eventually, as your own skills improve, you might, right? But there's other things that you'll probably use instead of Salesforce. And again, we'll cover those later. It's something called customer relationship managers, or CRMs, and we'll talk about those later as we go through. But right now it's more like, okay, what are the main tools for how you're going to coordinate and talk with and interact with the team that you're working with, right? So when a company hires you, you're going to need to be able to interact with that team, right? You're going to use Zoom calls just like this. So they can do Zoom back and forth. And that's pretty much how this is. You've used Zoom for a little while, so you kind of are familiar with that. A lot of people are familiar with Zoom now, which is great because this video stuff, this is what it is. And so this or something called Google Meet. So they also have that. So, but otherwise, it's these platforms. It's okay. I'm going to give you a Google Sheet, need you to update it for data entry purposes, right? Or create a report, or I'm going to give you a Google Doc and I want you to take that Google Doc and, create a blog post out of it. Maybe I need you to do something like that. Or it might be a Word doc, right? So now, you're okay. It's just a WordPress. It's the same thing, right? Or sorry, excuse me, a Microsoft Word doc is just the same thing as a Google Doc, just two different, it's whatever company created the program, but it's the same thing, right? They're both just word processors, both for that. So, hopefully it puts it in perspective a little bit, and then how things can change, right? So you can have somebody that uses Edge, but that doesn't mean they're doing anything different than you using Chrome. You're both just accessing the internet, right?
Why would somebody be on Microsoft Edge and just use Google search engine? Why do you think?
Sometimes just because they don't know that they can switch it. Sometimes it's just that they don't know they can switch it. Depends on who it is, right? There's 1,000 reasons. But a lot of it's because when you install Microsoft Windows, it comes with Edge.
Yes.
Microsoft does not say, hey, which browser do you want? Would you like to install Chrome? You have to go.
Because they want you to use theirs.
Right. So people tend to keep Edge. I will say Edge tends to be a slightly older crowd in most cases, or corporate.
Yes, it
tends
does.
to happen because corporations will lock it down. But a lot of corporations even use Chrome. So, but typically it's people that just keep it on without updating it. They did go through a big gigantic update. It used to be called Internet Explorer. Now it's called Edge because they renamed it because Internet Explorer was not a good one at all. So this one's a little bit better. And it kind of a funny bit is it's actually based on Chrome, just a different version of Chrome. Microsoft skinned it. So that's why it's better now, because they're actually it's built on the same thing that Chrome is. But anyway, so yeah, just sometimes it's personal preference. Some people just like Edge better. That's fine too. There is no wrong way of it. I can just say for the most part, if you're using Chrome, I like using the tools that most of the people are using most of the time, right? Because that means
it would make sense.
I'm going to be the most flexible, right? I'll be able to work with most of the people out there. So I would get used to Chrome because most people use that most of the time. I get used to obviously Google as a search engine because most people use that most of the time. Google Drive, because most of the people, especially with the businesses that you're going to try to go out there and learn skills for so that you can help them, they're going to be using these platforms. So really spend your time focusing this. You don't need to worry about being an Excel expert, because if you know Google Sheets, then you know spreadsheets enough. So if you did get an Excel spreadsheet, you would still be able to figure it out.
Okay.
It's a different version of it, right? So I would personally focus, and that's what I think we will do, is focus your skill building here, kind of using Google stuff. And then we'll add in other platforms like, the messenger platforms, that you might have.
Okay.
WordPress, right? A platform to create a WordPress site. It's called a CMS, a content management system. It just creates WordPress, create websites, and those are where you really get into the nitty gritty. This is the basic stuff, where it's like, okay, you can go to Google, you can upload stuff to, you can get Chrome and you can search for things on Google. Like that's good. That's where a lot of people are on their internet skills. They kind of just stop there, getting really good at Drive and understanding, how cloud storage works, right? It really, again, it's just which company's computers are you storing stuff on, right? That's all it really is. And then getting used to some of these productivity apps, getting good at docs and sheets and creating PowerPoint slides, things like that.
If you run out of storage on one of the cloud storages, can you do it on another one?
You could, but you wouldn't want to. Chances are you'll want to just increase that storage. And so they will come with a bit of free storage.
Yes.
Different accounts have different levels, and then you pay for additional storage. In the beginning, you probably won't have that problem. So I wouldn't worry about that, because at the time where you have so much stuff stored that you need the space, you're probably making decent money enough where it doesn't matter to pay somebody 20 extra bucks to get a month to pay all the extra stuff. Because it's like, if you're making a couple grand, what's $20, right? It's just the cost of doing business. Like when you pay the electric bill, right? Same thing. So there will be some things in business that are going to be costs that you're going to have. But there, in that case, that'd be a good cost. And you wouldn't want to split it in two different areas to save that $20 because now you've really just complicated your system.
Yes,
right?
I
You might be
understand
giving
that.
out Google stuff when you really meant to give out the Microsoft stuff, but then somebody else doesn't have Microsoft because they're using Google, and it's why it's not worth the hassle, right?
Okay.
All
Okay,
right.
I got that.
Okay, so to review.
Mm-hmm.
So what are productivity apps and how are they different from cloud storage?
Well, the productivity apps are just what you're doing, whether you're writing or saving pictures or whatever, or
Mm-hmm.
have pictures on there. But the cloud storage is where it's saved on a different computer in that particular company,
Right.
in Google
So
or
how are they
Microsoft.
connected? So if I gave you a sheet, right, a Google sheet, which is a spreadsheet,
Yeah,
and I say I needed you to update this, where is that spreadsheet saved?
it's in Google Drive.
It's in Google Drive, which is in Google's cloud. Exactly right. Right.
Okay.
It wouldn't be in OneDrive. It wouldn't be in iCloud because it's stored in Google Drive.
But I would have the ability to get into that. If I was working with a company, you would give me that information.
Correct.
To go in there and get that.
They'd give you a link and they would they would share it with your Google account, right? Which would
Okay.
be, what's your Google account out of all of this? It would be your email address.
Okay.
Right. Your Google account, the @Gmail address, right?
Right.
Or if you did a Google Suite, the paid version, but again, that's a later thing.
Okay.
And again, the whole point of that is when you're starting out, just learning these skills, you don't worry about creating Google Suites and business cards. You don't need any of that stuff. You just do the free versions, get your skills, right? Practice your skills, and then we'll start finding you ways to get your shingle out there, right? To post, hey, you do this stuff, right? And then we'll find you work, and you can do all of that with very simple free tools. As you make money, then you take a certain percentage of that and you reinvest it into the business to make the business stronger and better. Right? Then you improve things, then you grow things, but make that business feed itself as we go through. So you don't want to start, especially in the beginning, if you're just starting out with skills, which is where you are. That's what you do. Small, simple basics and practice. Get used to everything get used to teaching other people. That would be what I would recommend, is that you go and help your friends out and say, hey, I've learned these different things. Did you know this? Here's how these work. Here's why this happens. And to have a conversation in your head where the pieces are a little bit more clear. One conversation that you and I have probably won't clear up everything in the world, but it gives you at least a starting point that you can structure some stuff and have some idea of how the stuff pieces together.
Well, for me, having this visual really has helped a lot.
Good.
You know, as a learning tool, I need the visual.
Yep.
So while somebody could tell me what it was, I wouldn't have been able to really, it was always hard for me to understand. Whereas you putting it in the blocks really has helped a lot.
Good. Very good. And like I said, it really comes down to the focus, because this thing can keep going on with all the different hundreds of companies that are in the internet, and it can keep going down with all the different hundreds of different things you can do on the internet, right? But it doesn't really matter. You just keep your focus primarily on Google and Microsoft, primarily. Okay. But there will be third-party tools like Slack that you're going to come across, and it's like, hey, they're just owned by somebody else. It doesn't matter that it's Salesforce. Technically, it's just they're owned by somebody else. They're not one of the big three that owns it, but that's okay, because there's going to be third-party stuff, what they call third-party.
How do you find out about all that kind of stuff?
Your clients will bring it up to you, or other freelancers, as you start networking and working with others that are also freelancing. They might say, hey, we're using this, we're using that, or whatever. And you'll see.
And then you just download that onto your computer. Okay.
Yep. And then for the most part, most of the stuff has free versions. So if you're just starting out learning it, you can get it. Or they'll, a company like mine, right? I would invite you to our Slack. I would create a channel, which is what we did. So you can practice it a little bit. So I invited you to our Slack channel and you could play around with Slack. Right?
Okay.
But you could also do it for free on your own.
Okay.
So lots of different ways. All right.
All right.
So good to wrap up this first one.
Yeah. This is really good. I'm excited.
Perfect. Okay. So, so here's what we'll do. I'm going to go ahead and stop the screen share for now. So, so Mom Tackles the Internet will be the YouTube channel. Now that is not going to exist for a little bit because I need to edit this video, and these videos are a little more complicated to edit. So we're going to edit down the video a little bit. I'm going to try to keep the edits to a minimum because I want most of the raw conversation in here, because I think that we don't want it too fancy. And at least in the beginning anyway, just because I want to show what it's really like, right? So I'm going to, keep in most of the stuff that won't be heavily edited, but then we'll put it up in the YouTube channel. So if anyone's watching this on the YouTube channel and you have a question, that you want Mom Tackles the Internet to actually tackle and to go through and sort of explain stuff. It does not matter what, don't think to yourself like, oh, this is a stupid question, because you should hear some of the conversations me and my mom have already had. And so there are no stupid questions.
There are no stupid questions.
Right. And then Mom, you're going to go out there trying to find questions as well, so that you can keep them coming, right? So we can explain things.
Yep.
Again, the whole point for me personally is to help you personally get skills so that you can go and go build a little freelance business and make some money on the side, right? You don't need a ton, but you do have value that you can give. It's a way to participate in the world as it now is, especially in the post-coronavirus world. And there's so much potential out there. So that's what I want for you, is to see, sort of things that we have found in our own lives that the internet can allow when you have just very basic skills. You don't have to be perfect at everything, but you do have to be good at a few things. And that's what we can help you out with. It actually is not that hard to do that. And that's what the whole point of this channel is, for me to sort of document that process as you're leading the way, right? Being kind of the example for this. And of course, if somebody else gets value from the channel, so be it. But if you have a question, again, if somebody else is watching this and you have a question, put it in the comments. Just ask. If you need clarification on something, or you have a question on a brand new topic, suggest it. We're going to keep this on YouTube for a while, because I think that'll just be easier for everybody. Keep everything in one spot. So momtacklesinternet.com will go to YouTube, and you can just search on YouTube for Mom Tackles the Internet and find all of our videos. And of course, subscribe when it is out there. All right, Mom, anything else that you have for this week?
Nope, just that I'm really grateful. I have a son who's willing to teach me, because there are a lot of my friends who their kids just laugh at them and they won't even try. So I am grateful that my son is taking the time to work with his mom.
He is. He only laughs at you off camera.
He does.
When it can't be seen by everybody else. But, and like I said, but
that's okay.
At the end of the day, that's right. It's building skills. It's learning new things. And now we've got a conversation piece. So write down the questions that you have, that you hear from others. And of course, others that are watching this, participate, leave questions below. Does not matter how insane or stupid you think the question is, especially those questions, because those
there
are
no
nobody's
stupid
asking.
questions.
That's exactly right. Those are the ones that everybody else is waiting for somebody else to ask. So you can be that somebody, ask the questions, and then we'll cover it. Doesn't matter how tiny or stupid you think it is, because especially those ones are the ones you need to ask. Because sometimes if you make assumptions and you go the wrong direction right there, it makes the whole thing a lot harder. So don't worry about asking the simple questions. We especially want the simple questions. All right. So with that, I guess we'll go ahead and bring this one officially to a close. So thanks for being here for Mom Tackles the Internet. And then Mom, you and I will be doing this probably on a weekly basis. So I will chat with you next week.
All right. Looking forward to it.
Love you.
Bye. Love you.